I'm excited. This is our first issue panel on a very important topic, electoral reform. Just for those of you who are new, we're San Diego Indivisible downtown. A little bit of quick background, just so you all know. Prior to this meeting, so this is one of our monthly meetings, prior to this meeting we went through 3 meetings of developing policy goals. And so we put aside policy solutions. We said, forget policy solutions for a second. What are we looking to achieve in these different areas? Electoral reform, healthcare, economic justice, women's rights, immigration, so forth. Right? To set kind of our aim. And then the idea was, once we have defined what those goals are for our chapter, then we can have people who have the know-how, who have been working on these issues, come in and help to inform us on solutions that can help take us toward those goals and why those are the right solutions. And so this is our first issue panel on the topic that was the highest priority for our membership, which is electoral reform, to help to educate us on some potential solutions. I will also just say, just quickly as a little bit of background, and then we're going to jump right into it. As a little bit of background, we are taking our input in terms of policy goals and actually working with about 10 to 15 other chapters to develop, as a set of chapters, a unified set of goals on these issues so that our voice is coordinated, our voice is more unified. But we wanted to get started on educating, and so we're moving forward. I want to, share with you, and you probably, if you have a piece of paper, you have what our goals are, but I just want to quickly reiterate what our goals are so that we're all on the same page. All right. So, for electoral reform, here are the things that we said. Elections culminate in leaders who are representative of citizens. Every vote counts and is equal. There is equal and sufficient access to voting. The corrupting and potentially inequality-producing influence of money is out of politics. Elections are competitive. Only humans count. The election process is transparent. Election policy promotes being informed. There is integrity in campaign advertising. There's a goal of higher voter turnout. And voting and campaigning is safe and secure. So that's our aim. How does that sound, everybody? Kind of, maybe. Good. And so I'd like to introduce our panel, our panelists, and then we're going to jump right in and have them share with us what the most promising strategies are to help us achieve those goals. So Jennifer Pei, everyone say hi, Jennifer. Is California Director at FairVote, a nonpartisan champion of electoral reforms that give voters greater choice, a stronger voice, and a representative democracy that works for all Americans. She also travels around the country training hundreds of activists to run effective and strategic campaigns. Lori Shellenberger. Say hi, Lori. Lori Shellenberger is an electoral reform and voting rights strategist. She is the former director of the ACLU of California's Voting Rights Project from 2011 to 2017 and has worked on the pending Wisconsin Supreme Court case on gerrymandering. Chad Peace, say hi, Chad. Chad Peace is president of IVC Media LLC and legal strategist for the Independent Voter Project, which is dedicated to better informing voters about important policy issues and encouraging nonpartisan voters to participate in the electoral process. He helped pass nonpartisan primaries at the state level in California and is now organizing for reform nationally with the National Association of Nonpartisan Reformers. Kay Ragan, say hi, Kay. Kay is the past president of the League of Women Voters San Diego, a nonpartisan group dedicated to encouraging informed, active participation in government and influencing public policy through education and advocacy. She was part of the League's National Money in Politics study. And then we also have Ed Chaplin. Say hi to Ed. Hi, Ed. Ed Chaplin is press coordinator for the San Diego chapter of Represent.us, which aims to pass powerful anti-corruption laws that stop political bribery, end secret money, and fix our broken elections. He is currently focused on bringing campaign finance reform to elections here in San Diego. So we have a very esteemed panel, and so we have our first question, and I'm actually going to start in the order that I introduced you all. So Jennifer, you can start. You had a chance to read the goals that our members have for what they think electoral reform should achieve. What are the 2 to 3 most promising strategies for achieving these goals, and why?
Hi, everyone. Oh, good. It's working. Okay. My name is Jennifer Pei, the director of FairVote California. And the way that I approach this question is actually speaking from my own personal experience. I'm the first to be born here. My family immigrated here a little over 40 years ago. So having the first to go through a lot of experiences here in the States. When I went to college, the first of my family to go to college right down the way at UC San Diego, when I turned 18, I was the one that registered my mom to vote. And mind you, she'd been in this country for 25 years, didn't think about politics. We don't talk about politics. But she registered, and ever since then, she still calls me every election to help her with her ballot. It's spread to like the rest of my family now, and I'm the conduit for political information. And it's hard to believe that at my mom's age, when she was raising my sister and I as a single parent, I was then deciding to run for office. So in my mid-20s, I did this thing and ran for city council in Oakland. And one of the reasons why was because in Oakland, they have something called ranked choice voting. And so when you're able to rank your candidates in order of preference, that allows you to give more voice in the election system so that you're not voting the lesser of two evils. It's not susceptible to vote splitting issues, say you like more than one candidate. And then maybe your vote might inadvertently help elect the candidate you like the least. Not only that, as a first-time candidate, I only had to run once. There's no primary or runoff election. You go to a straight November, higher turnout, more diverse electorate, deciding who they want to represent you. So that comes in line with what I do at FairVote when we think about how do we give greater choice and stronger voice for our voters, then a representative democracy that works for all of us, right? So I would say the first goal that you outline, like how do we ensure that our representative body at the city council, board of supervisors, state legislature, in Congress actually looks like us and thinks like us, rather than the scenario of, whether it's gerrymandering or money in politics or the powers that be that want to hold on to that power, they're not allowing for the rest of us to have a meaningful say in not only our elections, but then ultimately the policies that we really care about. So in addition to that, I would say ensuring that our votes are really counted and that they're equal is really important.
Great. Lori.
Okay, I was going to talk about a couple things. Top 2 items that I think can really empower voters who have been marginalized and bring those folks into the process in California. Because we often think of California as this kind of safe haven, right, from what's going on in the rest of the country, but we are an incredibly diverse state, and we still have, we don't have the most representatives, right? So as an example, by way of example, in San Diego County in 2011, I got engaged in the redistricting process for the County Board of Supervisors and was shocked to learn that in a county that is a majority minority county, we had 5 white supervisors who not only had served almost 20 years together, they all went to the same college together. There was absolutely no diversity, and we fought really hard in the districting process, which was controlled by that body, to advocate for a majority minority district, which we got, and it takes time for those to sort of for those changes to take effect, but there's a lot of power building going on in that new district, and the hope is that in 2020 it will be more representative. So that's one way in which we can get engaged, is how are districts being drawn. One way is to have ranked choice voting, because then you don't have to worry about districts. Mm-hmm. But we are really stuck with districts in many jurisdictions. San Diego County, after that experience, passed, got a state law passed that allows for an independent commission to draw the boundaries for San Diego County in 2021 after the next census, and that is only as good as the people who serve on that commission, and as good as the data is from the census, and as the lines will only be as good as the community input that it's based upon. And so it's not just the Board of Supervisors, the City of San Diego, and lots of jurisdictions in San Diego County have in the last 10 years shifted to district elections. And without accountability, without public input, we could have some nefarious line drawing going on in 2021. So it's something for citizens to be really engaged in over the next few years. The second thing in terms of engagement, I'll just touch on it quickly because I know we're trying to open up a dialogue, is the challenge of getting people engaged in our elections, right, and getting them registered to vote. And so many people face so many barriers to getting registered to vote or updating their voter registration. California has a new law that's going into effect this year for the first time. We have a same-day registration law, which instead of dealing with a deadline that occurs before people get excited about elections and start getting, watching TV and seeing ads, people will be able to register and vote on the same day. But there's a dirty little secret here. The law only requires that it be offered at county elections offices. San Diego County will only be offering it at the county election office. And so there needs to be advocacy to encourage San Diego County and the Board of Supervisors to offer same-day registration in the communities that need it. Because as most of us know, if you work, if you don't have a car, it's going to be really challenging for people to get to the county elections office to register and vote. So that's another area where there needs to be some advocacy.
Great, thanks, Lori. Chad.
All right, so sorry if this is a little more philosophical than direct, because I got involved in election reform about 10 years ago during Proposition 14, the nonpartisan primary. So before those of you who don't like it, shoot me. I'm also sitting here with my friend Jennifer from FairVote, and we recognize the value that ranked choice voting and the improvements that could be made and some of the negative consequences of it. But I think that all relates to the election reform and the money in politics issue itself. Like, I don't have the perfect solution. I think anybody that says they have the perfect solution is wrong. But it starts off with understanding you have to separate your goal for fairness, right, which is like the umpire at a baseball game, and your fight for ideological battles, which is like the players on the field, right? You have to separate those two and understand that everybody's coming from their different perspectives, right? You may be supporting Hillary Clinton because you think the game's rigged against women. You might be supporting Donald Trump because you think the game's rigged against conservatives, Bernie Sanders for your own reasons. We all have our ideas of what it means to be rigged and not, but what we're really fighting for is having an equality of vote. And so whether it's us fighting for an election reform or a campaign finance law, I think one thing we need to do is stop, meet with the groups on the other side, or I don't like to say other side because I really believe there's a million sides, and we only really get to hear two in the media. But the first thing is to stop and go talk to the people that you would identify as conservative or liberal and get together and say, what process-wise, forget the ideology, the fights that are happening on Fox and NBC. When it comes to elections and money in politics, what's your perspective? And then let's get together and devise some rules and go and fight the system together, because it's really powerful if you have coalitions where they can't pigeonhole you as that's a left group or that's a right group. If you come together and say, no, this is about fairness, I think that's the first step towards fighting for something.
Great. Thanks, Chad. And Kay.
I think we are indeed coming from a different spot in this whole process. When I looked at your goals, I guess I centered on the one that I thought that I might have some knowledge about. I did participate in the study. Most of our studies take from 1 to 3 years. And so the League of Women Voters goes through a lengthy process. Thank you. Goes through a lengthy process of trying to define where we stand on an issue. There is a very brief position, and I'd just like to share it. The League believes that the methods of financing political campaigns should ensure the public's right to know, combat corruption and undue influence, enable candidates to compete more equitably for public office, and allow maximum citizen participation in the political process. I have to tell you, as a frustrated politician who always wanted to be in politics but did not go that direction, is I had a really strong feeling that all politicians were good and ethical and moral and would do the right thing. But after this study, I really do see that money can buy politicians. And I guess that for me was really a redeeming might say, well, it took you a long time to figure that out. But I just, because I hold that position relative to people generally, but when I read things like 47 people contributed 75% of the money in the 2016 election, that was 47 people. That is just startling to me. So when I was asked what are my 3 major issues, obviously I would like to do something about money in politics. So one of those ways is for the Senate to pass a disclosure act. Another way is that we can have a constitutional convention. Another way is that we can have government-financed elections. Any of those processes is going to take a lot of people power to make that happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Kay. Ed.
First of all, thank you. I want to acknowledge and thank you all for being here. You're obviously engaged, and for inviting our organization. So our organization has 3 pillars. One is to shut down the flow of money that goes through the lobbyist, essentially to make it illegal for both lobbyists to give money to politicians and politicians to accept it. Another is to make campaign contributions more transparent. So the secret money that we don't really know who is generating it, and it comes from organizations that sound, or names that sound, oh, this would be very good for our society. And then the third is really changing the electoral process itself. Getting away from either or choice that was mentioned, but also some form of public financing of campaigns to reduce the barrier to entry into the process for the average person.
Great, thank you. So let's dig a little deeper on some of these solutions. Jennifer, I'm going to start with you. As you mentioned, FairVote promotes the use of ranked choice voting in multi-member districts. Why exactly is this the preferred method among other reform options? So one of our members also asked about star voting as an example. You could have strict proportional representation, right? There's different forms of that, but proportional to the parties. Why is this one the preferred method that we should get behind with regard to the goals that we have?
Right, so for those of you that are hearing these terms for the first time, I want to break it down a little bit for you. What we believe and what I believe is the election system you use obviously directly impacts the kind of representation you get, right? How do we meaningfully participate in our elections? And I've worked on civic engagement campaigns for over a decade, registering, educating, turning out people to vote. But what if we're encouraging people to participate in a system that's inherently broken, right? So the solution that we came to is something called ranked choice voting, and you can use that when electing one person, say like a mayor, or you can use it in a system where you're electing a legislative body, like a city council or the state legislature or the U.S. House of Representatives. So I'll talk a little bit about that bill that we've introduced called the Fair Representation Act. Now what it'll do is, instead of having these gerrymandered district lines, you can essentially have a small state elect 3 to 5 members statewide. You don't need districts. And the way you do that is when you rank your candidates in order of preference, and based on the number of seats that you're electing, it helps to lower a threshold to win. So there's something called the tyranny of the majority. So if you are part of the 50.01%, you are essentially electing all of the seats. And that doesn't give any of us, whether you're in a minority party or not even affiliated to a party, or part of the community like myself, like part of the Asian American community, or even as a woman. What studies have shown is when you allow that threshold to be lowered, every vote is going to be meaningfully counted if you're part of the majority or the minority. And that means every voter has a fair share at the seat at the table. And as they say, if you're not on the table, you're on the menu, right? If you're not a part of that decision-making table, other decisions will be made on your behalf. And so to get there in a legislative body like Congress or the state legislature, you can use this form of ranked choice voting to get there. Now, there are other alternative voting methods that are out there, like star voting, approval voting. There are others. But I can tell you that ranked choice voting is the only one that has not only been used for decades, but it's also proven to show that you get better representation. Last year in Minnesota, in the Twin Cities, they elected their first African-American mayor in St. Paul, Melvin Carter, and he used this form of ranked choice voting. In the city of Cambridge, Massachusetts, they've used it since the 1940s, and what that has allowed it for is that 95% of their voters get one of their top choices elected. Imagine, if you're part of the small minority in a city, you essentially are voting, but your vote is being wasted. But in Cambridge, every vote is being meaningfully counted. And since they've enacted it, the communities that meet that threshold to win, they've been able to get a seat at the table. So that's the kind of transformative politics that we're trying to advocate for. But we also recognize changing election systems by asking elected officials to change the way they got elected is complicated, right? It's hard. You need a powerful voice, a community to say, this is not right. We're holding you accountable to go in this direction. So we've seen that coming, across the state and around the country through ballot measures, and we're very fortunate in California that we have that. Not all these states have that process to go to the ballot, right? So if the legislative body can't do it, then we're going to put it to the people. And I could talk a little bit later about what that looks like too, because we've also had some complications with that as well.
Great. And if any of you have something you want to say about any of these issues, just, yeah, go ahead.
I was going to just do a slight, not a counterpoint, but a complementary point, I hope. And that is that not all, I think districts aren't always evil, right? So not all districts are gerrymandered. And in fact, in California, districts have resulted in increased voter engagement and increased Latino representation in particular in California. And so it can be a really important remedy for certain communities. So, it is, districts can be complicated and messy, but, and ranked choice is a really great alternative as well, but I don't think districts are inherently evil either. They can actually really work to empower certain groups who, particularly if they live in a community that can be mapped into a district where they can have a majority of the vote.
Great. Chad, I wanted to actually, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just, I think as has been explained, to get away from the either-or choice where sometimes you're choosing the lesser of two evils, there's the ranked choice voting star. Just to say a little bit more about that, you would rate every candidate on the ballot with a star, 1 star through 5 stars, and those stars have weights, and they would total up the weights. The equal vote group thinks it's better than ranked choice, and I would say in theory it sounds like it could be, but when you make changes in very complex systems, there are always some unintended consequences. So I think that'll have to be tested in the field. And there are 2 counties in Oregon where there are groups like this that are trying to get the STAR initiative on the ballot.
Great. So yeah, so just to clarify a little bit further. So when you're ranking, right, you're ranking, each rank is kind of equally distant from the other, right? So rank number 1 is equally distant to rank number 2 to rank number 3. But when you're using star voting, you have the ability to rank a 5 versus a 3, and so they work in different ways.
Can you use emojis?
Okay, emojis too. So speaking of emojis, I want to talk about the full meaningful vote, because I know, Chad, you have used this. Maybe there's an emoji for a full meaningful vote. I don't know what that would look like. But Jennifer did talk about this idea of having some kind of meaningful vote, right? Having the vote be represented in some way. And so I wanted to turn to you and have you express a little bit more in practical terms, building off of what Jennifer was saying. How else might we think of what a full meaningful vote looks like? And I know that you have discussed taking this idea to the courts. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, so like I said, I don't know whether star is better than ranked, is better than whatever else it is, but I think we actually have court precedent for this. That's a pretty good principle of what is a meaningful vote. And it's been, over 50 years now since the Supreme Court says 1 person, 1 vote. And what does that mean? Is it 1 person's meaningful vote against somebody's symbolic vote? But I think we have to look at all these laws to say, at every stage of the public election process, does every voter, regardless of their ideology, their political party, or anything else, have the same opportunity to express who they want to represent them? So one of the things we've taken to the courtroom, and if you're a supporter of closed primaries or whatever, I'm sorry, but we challenged closed primaries in New Jersey, and we chose New Jersey for a specific reason. It's no secret that there's a little discussion of corruption and stuff that goes on there, but in New Jersey, does anybody have any idea how many voters, not potential voters, people that took the step of registering to vote, chose not to join either the Republican or the Democratic Party? Anybody have any idea?
44%.
47%. Wow. These are people that took the step of saying, I want to participate, I just don't want to join one of those two teams. Now, in New Jersey, just like almost every state that has primaries, the taxpayers fund the primary election. So how many people think the primary elections are an important stage of the public election process? So how could we possibly have an equal vote if at the first and most important stage of the process, 47% of voters, just because they didn't want to join a political party, which should be a First Amendment right issue, in my opinion, are totally precluded, legally not allowed to participate at the first stage. So if we want to encourage voting, get people in the process, we shouldn't have the state using taxpayer money to say, these two private organizations are going to pick a candidate and you just wait right there.
Great. Okay.
I just wanted to say, I think education is so important in voting. We are emphasizing the importance of vote, but education is really important, is to know who you're voting for and what their policies and what their beliefs are, as well as being informed on initiatives and ballot measures. So just voting is not all the issue, it's education as well.
Great, and I'm actually going to come back to that idea of education when we get into the money and politics discussion. Lori, I just wanted to follow up on one of the items you brought up a little bit earlier, which is the idea that districts can actually be help representation in some way. And so, can you just share, is redistricting and let's say a method like ranked choice with multi-member districts, are they doing the same thing? Are they different? What are their differences? What are their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to representativeness, when it comes to having a full, meaningful vote?
Yeah, I think it can be very contextual, right? It can depend upon the particular jurisdiction sometimes, because as I said, districts in California in particular have been really beneficial to the Latino community because it's a large community, and also can, in certain cities, have a majority district where they can gain a seat. But for the Asian American community, which is more dispersed and often is not comprised, let's say you have a city and it's 40% Latino and 25% Asian American, like they're never going to have enough to map a district and get a seat at the table in ranked choice voting. So their vote isn't really counting, right? In those, and so assuming there's not political alignment, with the Latino community or others, and in whichever district they're living in. But ranked choice voting, I think, is is the one way to ensure that level of access for communities that don't have that density where they can achieve a majority in a district that they can win.
Okay. Yeah, Jennifer.
And add to that, I'll give you a specific example. So in Santa Clara, up north, right, there is a June ballot measure that we're supporting where they're considering this. It's a mix. Because the city is incredibly diverse, it's very well integrated. They've had 12 Asian American candidates have run. They've all lost because of vote splitting issues, despite the fact that they make up over 30% of the population. And so there is now a ballot measure in place where we're going to use this mixed, multi-member district model. So you're going to use ranked choice voting. And once again, that threshold to win gets lowered. And so the community is able to be not only run, but because of vote splitting issues, that gets minimized. on top of which making sure that that voice, that vote that's going to get counted is going to be meaningfully counted. And I would say when we do draw district lines, there's the national bill that I mentioned, Fair Representation Act. When you have too large of a region, you can draw fair districts with an independent body. Once again, deciding who's a part of that body is going to be very important. And then using the ranked choice voting and electing multiple people for office.
Yeah, because Santa Clara is really like a hybrid. It's almost it's a hybrid districts and ranked choice, which is an interesting solution.
And just for clarification, when we say multi-member, that means multiple members represent a given district. So you're actually wind up voting for multiple people from an election. Ed, I wanted to turn to you and shift the conversation a little bit to money and politics. So we can create systems that create greater choice, more representativeness and competitiveness, that open it up for more people to get involved in the way that they want to. And yet at the same time, the influence of money can still shape how we're informed to make those actual choices through that process, right? And so we actually have one of our members who had a question about how should we think about campaign finance in different models. And so I'm going to turn it to Katie Hogue.
Yes.
Hi, Ed. Hi, everyone. So my question is about, because all of these issues are so important, but before we get to the ballot, how do we get fair people on the ballot? That's like a fair selection process to begin with. So I think we need public financing of elections mandated. How do we get that? Is it working anywhere? And can it work nationally?
Yes, good question. In looking at the options that are across the country, I think there are three major ways of going about this that have been tried. One is what's called clean elections, and that's most notable in the state of Maine and the state of Arizona. As a candidate for all of these things I mentioned, you have to meet certain criteria. You have to commit to debate. You have to commit not to take other funds. So those are common to most of them. So in the clean elections in Arizona, you go out and you raise a small amount of money. I forget what it is. It's like $10. It's not an amount. You get a certain level, and then you give that money to the election commission, and then they give you an amount of money to run your election. And it varies whether it's the mayor or whether it's the city. So that would be the Clean Election Initiative. The other is the Fair Elections Act, or is that in the act they're talking about? No, that's different. Yeah. So fair elections, it usually goes by. And there you get small donations, and this is the way Berkeley works, this is the way LA works, this is the way New York City works. You go out and you raise small amounts of money, say $250. And then the election commission matches that at a multiple. And in New York, it happens to be for every dollar you raise, you get $6, up to a maximum. And again, you've agreed not to take money beyond that maximum. The third one that was just used this past fall in Seattle is a voucher program. So in the city of Seattle, every adult citizen, not registered voter, adult citizen, gets 4 $25 vouchers. And then you pledge those to the candidates. And the candidates then also, to participate, they agree to, they will not raise beyond a certain amount of money. They will not take money from PACs. They will not go out and help PACs raise money. And they agree to participate in debates and things along that line. So those are the three major ones. In San Diego, there's actually a history of trying to do this. So back in 2016, there was a coalition that were for the 2016 election to get a ballot initiative on for the Clean Money Act, where you would just get a few small donors, and then the election commission would give you money. They failed. The league was a sponsor of that, as was Common Cause, the Sierra Club, and a number of other organizations. And they failed to get enough signatures to get it on the ballot. I think currently you need about 70,000 signatures, and to get to the 70,000 level, you need about 100,000, because some get thrown out. There is a coalition of groups currently meeting in San Diego to put an initiative on the 2020 ballot. And again, the league is part of that. And let me just see if I have a list of the other organizations so I don't miss them. Common Cause, Sierra Club, Activist San Diego, League of Conservation Voters, Older Women's League, San Diego Organizing Project, Women Occupy San Diego. And it's in the drafting stages at the present time, and the goal is to use the model of New York City and LA, where you will have small donor elections and you can raise up to a certain amount of money, and you sign the commit to it. And there are penalties if you don't. The other thing that's key for all of these is that any election donation, any campaign donation, there's immediate transparency. So in New York City, even if there's a PAC sponsoring a non-candidate, that PAC has to when they receive money, it has to be made publicly available on the website within 24 hours. So I think it's both the funding and until, or in the climate of Citizens United and the PACs, there needs to be a way of dealing with that source of funds as well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so how do we get it on the national level?
Oh, well, I don't think there's any way you can get it on a national level. I mean, that would require, the two parties control the country. And I've come to view the two parties as private organizations, publicly supported, that are in the business of making gains for themselves and their special interests, no matter which party it is.
Yeah.
And I would add, so if not the national level, then what, right? So these examples that he gave exactly, at the local level, city by city, state by state, right? Because even the state laws will control the state legislature, but then also members of Congress and how they're able to get their finances to run, right? And once again, we're talking about level the playing field. I mean, there's a reason why people who decide to run for office, you know, when I ran, we didn't come from wealth, right? I mean, we basically grew up in poverty. Money was not an option for us. So when I ran in Oakland, there was a system of campaign financing so that I knew that I could rely on some city funds once, you know, I agreed to a certain set of rules, right, and certain disclosures. And so that was incredibly helpful to not just be able to make sure that our votes are meaningfully counted, that you've got these disclosures to show once they get elected, who are they accountable to, per se, and then even for someone like me to be able to run in the first place, to be a viable candidate.
Chad, and then Lori, you have something you want?
You can go for it.
Go ahead.
So I'm probably the least informed up here about the money and politics types of bills and stuff that are there. But back to the perspective thing, how many of you have heard of Citizens United? How many of you have heard of Buckley Vallejo? Oh, good. Right, so part of this is money in politics, I think, is one of the hardest issues, and thank you for taking that one on, because I believe that money will always find politics, and so you can write the rules as best you can help make the game more equal, but the money is a powerful thing, and it's going to go into every crack and crevice that you can create. But then I think, at a national level, as one of the things is to question, revisiting things like Supreme Court decisions that said, well, an individual can't give, you can put limits on an individual giving to a candidate because there might be some corruption there. Well, what about in light of today, of Citizens United saying that a private organization can give unlimited amounts of money? So if we look at these as in that's just the way it is, or and not looking at them as like being continuous, then I think it's hard to solve the money and politics issue. I don't have the right answer, but I think it's absurd that you could have a private organization. They're not just treating them like a person, they're treating them like more than a person, because they have rights that I don't have and you don't have. So, Lori.
Constitutional amendment.
I was just going to comment too on the public financing. The third option that Ed talked about, I think, is a really exciting one. The other two also, they all provide, access to candidates who might not otherwise be able to afford to run for office. But the third, public, the voucher system, where you're getting, I think you get what did you say? It's $100.
Yeah, $425 vouchers.
And it actually, non-citizens get it in Seattle as well. So you don't, which I think is really exciting, because politicians not only represent voters, they represent everyone in a district or in their community. And so the third option provides a really nice catalyst for people to become more engaged and civically engaged when you get that. And it was a pretty high, it wasn't a super high percentage of people who use the vouchers, but it was a significant number, I think, for the first time. And it really, they're still studying the outcome, but it really resulted, I know, in at least one council member who would have never been able to run for office.
With 3 city council elections, every one of those entered the voucher program. I think, and again with the clean money and that, it gives you a distinction that you certify that you're not going to take this outside money, which is an advantage in today's climate.
So Kay, I wanted to turn it to you because you did bring up constitutional change, and so we're talking about local, state changes. What is the role of constitutional change? Can we get to our goals without it? And what would that look like?
Well, I think personally that the constitutional change is almost as difficult as getting money out of politics.
Yes.
Because the Constitution has, the last time it was changed was in 1992. And they passed the 27th Amendment, and that was to say that Congress could not collect on its raises until the new year. So there has not been an amendment since then. It would require both the House and the Senate a 2/3 vote to put it then to the states, and then the states would have to ratify it by 2/3 of the states. For that to happen, just think about it a moment. They would either have to ratify it or they would have to call individual conventions to help it to pass. Just going back to one of the earlier points, I think the other part of this is if those who are running for elected offices were supportive of what we're talking about, that would be an underlying way to get it to pass at any level, is to say, I'm willing to play by those rules and I won't have to spend half my life raising money. So if we were to educate politicians, perhaps on that point, that would be helpful as well. To pass the Disclosure Act, which the Congress has failed to do over 4 different times, saying that there would be a limitation and that there would be full disclosure of who is contributing and how much they're contributing, and the Congress has not been able to pass any one of those pieces of legislation. So indeed, we're looking at an uphill battle, whichever route we were to pursue.
Did anyone else want to comment on the constitutional change?
Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I think it's really hard to get as you're hearing, right? But I think it can be very, sometimes our local challenges can be hard, and it's easy to kind of default to sort of what's going on the national level. And I still tend to believe, and maybe it's because I started out as a community organizer, but I think that there is so much that can be done to impact what's happening locally, and that's where that starts. And then you're building a pipeline of people who will run for supervisor or eventually run for Congress. But investing in your local community and advocating for change there, I think, is just still where it's the best bang for your buck.
Chad, and then Ed.
Just as a kind of general comment, sometimes maybe what the constitutional change we're seeking might actually just be the constitutional question we'd like to get in front of the Supreme Court, right? So if you look at what led to one person, one vote, that was a fight that took decades, and it wouldn't even be allowed in the court for a long time. So that's a political question, get it out of the courtroom. That's a political question, why are you asking the court, right? They finally broke the barrier in a district court there, and then they finally got it, more judges to take up. And then actually the one person, one vote vote decision was actually decided in a case about primary elections, as it relates to the earlier question. But, you know, and look at the gay rights decision. That didn't happen overnight. It's so part of the money in politics may say, hey, look at all these decisions, and getting groups that aren't looking at the decision of how does this help my group or my party or whatever, getting a group of public citizens to get together and say, you know what, let's get into the courtroom and ask the right question, because the court's only going to answer the one you bring to them.
Yeah, I would just echo what's been said. There is a national movement to get a constitutional convention on Citizens United. I think it's an enormous hurdle. I don't think as a society we can wait for that. And I think you go back to the rights that were mentioned, or you go back in my generation, it was Mothers Against Drunk Driving. I mean, they changed our culture. They changed the discourse. They changed the laws around driving. And I think it is going to be a local grassroots kind of effort, and it will become, at some point, a groundswell. And people from the states, it was said, that get elected will be more friendly to those kinds of changes. Great.
I do want to cover the disclosure point that was made up, but I'm going to transition from a time perspective to redistricting, and we'll come back to it in the case that we have time. And we have another member who has a question about redistricting. Tom, where are you? Tom's not here. Okay, great. I will ask Tom's question. Actually, I'll ask another member's question. So Michael Gordon, he's not here, but he did submit this. What is the roadmap and key milestones to reverse some of the wrong-headed gerrymandering results now in place? And this is to anybody.
Okay. I can start a little bit on that. I mean, in terms of, do you think that he's talking about partisan gerrymandering? Because usually that's what folks are. Yeah. White folks are most interested in that too. It tends to be, but basically, what's happened, and this goes to Chad's point, is that over the years there have been cases brought to try and figure out, is there a constitutional standard that we can develop to measure what is too much partisan gerrymandering? Because there's always going to be partisan gerrymandering, right? But when do we know if it's too much? And so the court has, over the years, acknowledged that there is a problem. There's a constitutional problem, and it's a First Amendment problem, which is what we're talking about here. I'm crammed into a district where my vote is never going to count, and I'm being crammed into that district because of my political viewpoint. There's a very sophisticated demographer who's evaluating how many Republicans and how many Democrats there are, and because I'm a Republican, I'm getting put into this district so that my vote won't count, right? And so the cases before the court now are probably the most encouraging that we've had. And part of that is because we have a lot of political science, and the technology has become so much more sophisticated that we're feeling more and more confident that there are ways to determine when is it too much, right? Other than just looking at something on its face like North Carolina, where it's like, oh, there are barely 50% Republicans, there are 13 congressional districts, and 10 of them are Republican, right? And Pennsylvania, which just is getting a new map, it was the same way. So that is sort of where that lives on a legal level. Are we going to get a decision from the Supreme Court in June, which probably won't happen until June, but that will give us a measure, which means we hope less litigation and more standards that states can follow. But the other piece of that is do independent commissions draw better maps, right? And we think generally that's probably the case. So states, the shift to independent commissions is resulting in better maps in the states that have them. So California is an example. Washington has had an independent commission for decades, and they've never had a map challenged. So it doesn't necessarily lead to more litigation, right? We're finding those maps to be more objective and less challenges. And again, as Jen mentioned, independent commissions are only as good as the people who are on them, and the people who are on them are only as good as the communities who engage to encourage people to apply. But independent commissions, both local and at the state level, are, I think, a huge solution to the problem of partisan gerrymandering as well.
one of the things in reference back to your point is that when I was talking about litigation, I didn't mean that sits in a box. I mean, all of these things are battles that are fought in the initiative process, in the public opinion. I mean, there's been TV shows and TV series that were all designed to elevate issues that then were eventually decided, in states and in courtrooms. But as it relates to this issue of redistricting, I think it's an extremely important one, and the fact that they're talking about the issue of partisan, advantage in drawing the districts is an important one. But this may sound a little bit more esoteric or philosophical, but I think it goes back to asking the right questions. Is in the media, in a lot of the courtrooms, in the discussions, we're talking about civil rights. So how is the answer to have an equal competition between two political parties? The question should be, how do we have an equal competition among every individual voter? And then the parties will, by consequence, have to be more representative.
Yeah, just to reiterate that, I think if we're going to be successful, you have to take advantage of every avenue to begin to try to put a chink in the wall, and there will be cumulative effects because it changes the public discourse.
So there are three things that I've heard brought up that I want to get more detail, more specifics on. One was, how should we think about the measure of success of a district? What is the way to think about it? You don't have to have the specific measure, but what should we be looking for? Two is, what is a process, and I know, Jennifer, you were the first to bring this up, the process to make sure we have the right folks on. Who are the right folks to have on, and what is the process to do that? And then the third one that I just want to put out there, and I think, Ed, in an email you mentioned this, is what guidelines do we give to commissions to make sure that they're producing, to be effective in reaching the outcome? So there's, what does success look like for a well-drawn district? How should we think about who should be on that to help produce it? And what are the guidelines we give them? Thoughts? Anyone?
I mean, there are sort of these, what they call redistricting criteria, right? And those, the broader level are things like compactness and contiguity. Like, you don't want to draw a district that's divided, or, one of the districts in Pennsylvania that was just redone, it was only connected literally by a steakhouse, right? And that's how they were managed to, create these districts. So, and then we look at the Voting Rights Act. So what's happening, our communities, they're protected communities, right? Racial, ethnic, and language minorities that have suffered a history of discrimination, are their rights and are their votes being diluted in any way by the way the districts are being drawn? And if you can draw a majority district in a jurisdiction that has a history of discrimination, the law requires you to do so. And then the third is communities of interest, right? What is a community of interest? That can be a variety of things. That can be, everyone in my community relies on, or the majority of people rely on, public transportation. I may have different interests than a community where everyone drives. What are the public safety issues in my community versus another community? So a lot of it's socioeconomic. And the only way a body, whether it's the legislative body or an independent commission, can draw boundaries is if they're hearing from communities about what their community really looks like. And it doesn't have to be, I think it seems really overwhelming sometimes to communities. Like, I need to know what an entire map of California looks like to talk about my community. You don't even have to envision what your own district looks like. Just, what is your community about? This is my school. This is where I shop. These are the biggest concerns I have. And you start to build, they're like puzzle pieces. And if you have public testimony and a transparent process where people can come in and talk about that you can hold, it doesn't even matter if it's an independent commission, you can start to hold a legislative body that's, drawing their own districts accountable. But you have to engage the community. And even before that, and then I'm going to stop talking and let someone else address another question, but the other piece of that, but is the census is so critical to being able to draw fair districts. And we have really big challenges coming up, and I don't think they can be overstated. The fear in communities right now, we have serious concerns that people are not going to participate in the census, mixed status households especially. And so And there still are not the resources that need to be put into the census. And census work builds towards civic engagement. I mean, if you invest in groups, people doing the census need to be people who live in those communities who are trusted messengers. And doing census work that leads into civic engagement work is really critical. And I think there needs to be huge investment in that this time around.
Jennifer, do you want to take on the who should be a part of it and how do we make sure they are, these commissions? How do we think about that?
Sure. I mean, Lori covered pretty much everything that I would echo.
Okay.
I mean, the thought of an independent commission is important because we had a scenario up in Fremont where the city was being challenged that there was racially polarized voting, that communities were not able to elect their preferred candidate of choice. And so then, of course, the discussion is, then what is the solution? For them, they thought, okay, well, let's do districts. But because of the way the law is written and the timing, they ended up drawing their own district lines. And this goes back to community input, how important it is for folks to step up and say something in public. I know, and leaning to organizations that can help them through that process. But even submitting public testimony is incredibly important. But unfortunately, at the end of the day, there was not enough time, there wasn't enough resources, there wasn't an independent body, and the city council drew their own lines, right? So there is this tug and pull of what is already written in law and in statute, what kind of public accountability can be put into place to then say, no, hey, this isn't right, let's do something different. Because I can tell you in another city right over across the bay in Menlo Park, they said, no, we're not going to have the city council do that. We want an independent commission, and they held them accountable to that, to create a body to do that. And so now they're going through a whole process by which they're going to hear community input and then weigh in. But at the end of the day, those recommendations are still going to go back to the city council to then get approved or not, right? I guess the opening would be based off the census. We have every 10 years, based on new data, then hopefully we'll get new good lines, right? So those are the kind of complications we have to really navigate through.
Great. Chad, did you have something you wanted to add?
I suppose I'll give a little bit of a different question on that issue, is saying, like, in fact, if you got ranked choice voting and you got rid of primaries, the redistricting would be much less of an issue. If we had nonpartisan primaries where all voters were treated the same, redistricting wouldn't be an issue. Is understanding why has redistricting become such an issue? It's because the two parties are playing an increasingly higher level of a game of the system. Both parties are doing it, and that's exactly why we had the malapportionment issue that led to one person, one vote. So it's important to get involved in that fight. But from my perspective, I think that's not really the underlying issue that voters are concerned about. That's just one of the tools of the game that's being so badly manipulated that it's coming to the forefront of the attention.
Great. So time-wise, we're going to transition to a different set of questions. We've talked about electoral process, electoral rules, about drawing districts and what are some solutions there, as well as campaign finance solutions. How would you recommend that members get engaged? What are ways that they can get engaged in being part of, in engaging in the redistricting process, engaging in changing voting rules, and so forth? What would your recommendations be for them? Go ahead,
Join
Kay.
the League of Women Voters. We have numerous committees on numerous issues, and of course, politics and voting rights are at the very top of our agenda. And I want to hasten to add that we have men who are very active in the League of Women Voters. So, and then on the heels of getting people registered is getting people educated, is our forums and our meetings, our luncheons, a number of activities. All of those are hindered by volunteers. And I know your organization is the same way. You're wanting people to get involved. But I would just say that probably with any of our groups, there are open doors to getting involved and being involved in an issue that you're most involved in. We've just heard about the fair election effort. That failed not because there weren't people interested, but we didn't have enough people and enough bodies to get the signatures. So I can think of an issue right now that's very near and dear to my heart, is it's going to take all of us to be involved at some level or another on an issue that is important to you.
Great. Ed, do you want? We'll go down the line. Ed.
I would reiterate that. I think that one thing that could be helpful in the community would be something of a clearinghouse of what all the organizations are doing, because I think the people here are obviously engaged. At some point, if we get to the point of getting signatures, we're going to need an army of people to get the signatures. At some point, if an issue is going to go before the court, or the issue is going to go before a redistricting commission, to be able to mobilize a number of people to show numbers, to get people's attention. I think that would, and be willing to do that across organizations.
Okay, great. Jennifer.
So you're hosting an event, which is amazing. First off, I want to congratulate the organizers for putting this event on. And you've outlined clearly some goals. So then the decision is, so what's the strategy? Are you going to go through a ballot measure process? Are you going to do a legislative fight at the local or state level? Are you going to pose a lawsuit, right? So what is the strategy to get you to that goal? And how are you going to get there? I just want to give you an example of a situation over in Maine. Maine is the first state to consider ranked choice voting statewide. And the reason being their governor was elected both times with less than a majority of the vote, right? Less than 40%, because the Democrat and independent gubernatorial candidates essentially split the vote. And they couldn't get anything through the state. They couldn't get anything through the state legislature or to get the governor to sign it. So what happens? The people organized. They got volunteers right off the bat, did signature gathering across the state, then got it on the ballot, and it was approved with the second highest number of votes in the state of Maine for a ballot measure. Okay, so overwhelmingly the voters wanted it. However, it's not just one thing to get it on the ballot and then to get it to pass, it's implementation. So in the implementation phase, the state legislature and the governor were like, no, all right, yeah, you passed it, but we're not really gonna do it. And fortunately, in the Maine Constitution, there's something called a people's veto. And once again, the people organized. They said, no, hold up, this is what we want. And they had volunteers come out that didn't initially support the idea, but they said, no, we don't want this to then go backwards because the people already voted in favor of this. And so just this last month, they collected the signatures, got them submitted, they were accepted. So once again, there's going to be another ballot measure to ensure that not just for the governor's race, they're going to have ranked choice voting, but for all state and congressional races. And they have closed primaries, so that's another issue, for their primaries and their general election. So I leave it to all of us, right? It just takes that quote, right? That small organized group of folks to make change happen. And it's really all of us having conversations like this, figuring out who else is not in the room that you can have conversations with, to then build essentially a movement for change at the local, which will then build to state and national conversations.
Great. Chad.
I think they also collected the signatures, the last set of signatures, in the middle of one of the biggest snowstorms on the East Coast, which didn't make it.
And we're in San Diego here, you know?
But I go back to kind of what I said at the beginning. I think the hardest thing and the most difficult thing is don't allow them to divide you. And they divide us by ideological battles that they presume are the only important issues of the day. I think there's lots of groups, whether it's FairVote, Represent Us, League of Women Voters. There's so many groups to get involved in, but I think what's most important is that those groups also communicate with each other and accept the differences they may have on other opinions. And I'll make as a last point, because it probably sounds like I'm negative or pretty anti-party. I'm actually not. The Republican Party should be heralded for ending slavery. The Democratic Party has brought us huge successes in the civil rights. Is also not take out the anger on the parties themselves or the people that think the healthiest way for them to get involved is to go within a political party. It's understanding that it's the system, it's the incentives that have been aligned by the rules, and that if we're going to fix the rules, we have to fix them with people that we disagree with, for the purpose that we can have a government where the people who disagree sit down and act civilly in a way to resolve those differences.
Great. Lori.
And I'm assuming most people here are then residents of the city of San Diego, right? So, you've had this kind of menu of ideas here of things you can do to get engaged. I mean, I think it's really exciting as a group for you all to sit and think about, we should be agitating for publicly financed elections in San Diego. Like, why don't we have that, right? Like, do we want to get engaged in districting, or what would ranked choice voting look like in the city of San Diego? And these are the kinds of things, because it's a charter city, right? You have to get ahead of it because you got to get an amendment. So to the charter, if you can't convince the city council, which you won't, to do it. So I think it's figuring out what are those issues that are important, and focusing on one, and making some noise. And as Chad said, building coalitions with the communities. There's a lot of, we want to see more voter engagement, right? There's still communities that aren't participating and as much as they should be. And I think the most important thing about sort of voter engagement is that, and it's kind of becoming more of a term. Lots of us have always believed it, but integrated voter engagement, right, is sort of the buzzword these days. But it means you can't just knock on people's doors and say, you should register to vote, you should go vote. It has to be touching. It has to be something that sparks someone. I know in the community I live in, people are really fired up right now about gun control, right? There's got to be something that touches people, and you're engaging with those communities on an issue that they feel passionately about. So I think that's a really important thing to keep in mind, because I see a lot of groups out there now wanting to do more voter registration, wanting to engage people, but I think you have to do that in a really strategic way that's intertwined with an issue that you decide you want to advance and start moving on.
That's a great segue. How many of you have done a voter registration training or canvassing with us? Oh, that's great. How many of you who haven't would like to? Great. So one of the reasons why we're doing these issue panels is to be able to connect you to some of the issues that matter to our constituency, but most definitely probably to our community as well. Yeah. And so this gives you a way to have things that you could communicate about. Now, we'll of course think about how we're going to, advocate for these particular issues. We've developed out a lot of our electoral work. So we have voter registration training, we have canvassing training and go out and canvass neighborhoods. We have these to help inform you, as well as to inform how you message and how you ask people about the things that matter, and be able to talk about ways that we can actually change things on those issues. And so I urge you to keep in touch with us, keep coming to meetings, and get involved. Go to our voter registration trainings. We're going to have canvassing events coming up. This is your way to engage, to bring people in to the mix, so that we can grow our movement to move forward issues like this. On that note, let's give our panelists a big hand. And so I'm going to transition to our founder, Sarah Pease. Come on up.
Hey guys, thank you again to our panel. We ran out of time today to do Q&A. If you're able to stick around for just a few minutes, that'd be great. I will steal all of you for 30 seconds immediately after this, so don't go anywhere yet. One thing I wanted to make sure I make mention of is, does anyone part of our Facebook group? Raise your hand if you're part of our Facebook group, or if you know about it. Maybe you get our email newsletter. Okay. There is a communications team with this chapter, Indivisible. And one of the hardest working members, I mean, literally, it's like ER doctors are on call, and then there's Sue, who does our social media. Sue, can you stand up, please? Let's give her a round of applause. Guys, Sue, I just wanted to recognize her. She is 24/7, breaking news is happening, and she is on it. She puts together the schedule and everything. All of our working group leaders work closely with her to help promote the items that the working groups are working on. So I just wanted to recognize her and all the hard work she's done.
I also wanted to let you all know that our next meeting is March 18th. We will be focusing on healthcare. We'll have a panel as well to discuss. Yes, and it is right here. Thank you very much. It's going to be right here. We'll have a panel to discuss how we achieve our goals in that area. Again, we had a session to get your input on what our goals should be. April 29th, we'll have a panel on economic justice. the location is to be determined. So that's March 18th, April 29th. Also, keep looking at the newsletters and the Facebook posts and everything that go out, because there'll be a lot of other events. Like I said, voter registration training, which I just do want to recognize. Where's Larry? Larry's our voter reg guy. We had how many people at the training? 25 people yesterday. 25 people. And so come get trained, and then we have a lot of events where we go out and register, and also, again, keep your eyes out for canvassing events, which is also awesome. What's that? Where is Mary Lou? Oh, Mary Lou. When's our next canvassing? Do we know yet?
We'll let you know. We think it might be March 11th, but it may, we'll let you know.
Okay, sounds good. We'll let you know. Come on out and help us go out and canvass. Lastly, we are doing a plum fund. There's a link on the handout that you should have. It'll also be shared on social media. This is to help to fund these events. We actually have to pay for the space and whatnot. So if you could go there and donate and help us continue to put on these events, that would be great. Otherwise, we will end the way that we normally end, with our last 5 minutes. What I want you to do is I want you to find someone you don't know. And I want you to share with that person what in the last week or month, or maybe the last couple days, frustrated you, excited you, angered you, made you happy in the political realm. And what did you do about it, or what could you do about it? So go ahead and find someone to share with. Both of you share something in the last week that stirred something in you. And hopefully we'll see you again on March 18th. Thank you.